Welcome to episode 12 of the Liz McMullen Show. My guest this evening is Erin Dutton. Good evening, Erin.
Good evening.
Welcome to the Liz McMullen Show.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a fun place to hang out. So I have actually been a fan of you for many years.
Thank you.
And I've read a lot of your stuff, and I hear you have something brand new right out of the hopper that is available. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
I do. It's called More Than Friends, and it's actually available now at the Bold Strokes Books website in ebook or in print, and it'll be available in other venues, I think next week. It's mid-February. But it's called More Than Friends, and it's about a police officer, Evelyn, and she's been in and out of relationships, and her best friends, Kendall and Melanie, have been together for 7 years, and they're kind of her model for a successful relationship. But fairly soon into the story, they split up, and it's kind of the story of how the three of them, how their relationships evolve, and what happens when Evelyn finds herself having feelings for one of the two.
Love triangle.
Yeah, a little bit.
Well, my interest is certainly piqued, and I'm excited that you're going to be doing a reading for us. Start whenever you're ready.
Okay, well, I'm just going to start right at the beginning, chapter 1. We kind of open up with a scene that introduces Evelyn. She's a police officer here in Nashville. 215B, I've got one not stopping. Eastbound on Shelby, passing 6th. Evelyn Fisher nearly shouted into her radio in order to be heard over her siren. She split her attention between the red sedan in front of her and the upcoming intersections, always watching for any other vehicles pulling out in the middle of her pursuit. Her sergeant acknowledged her transmission and gave his permission to continue the chase. She never lifted her foot off the accelerator. 2 other patrol cars pulled up behind her as she allowed a quick glance in her rearview mirror before returning her attention to the red Nissan Altima in front of her. As the suspect vehicle slowed to round a corner, the passenger side door popped open and one of the occupants jumped out. He hit the ground, barely able to regain his footing, then took off. "Passenger just bailed," the voice of one of her fellow officers crackled over the radio. "Male, Hispanic, white t-shirt, blue jeans." The description was succinct in order to not tie up valuable airtime on the channel. As the lead car, Evelyn stayed behind the sedan, confident that one of the other units behind her would pick up the passenger. The officer in the second car called out the street names as they wove through the neighborhoods just east of downtown Nashville. The organized cadence of the vehicle pursuit dissolved into the transmissions from the officers chasing the passenger on foot. "I lost sight of him behind the houses over here. Dispatch, see if we can get aviation. The Altima just went into the park. Driver's looking for a place to bail. Somebody hold back and seal this entrance. Maybe we can trap him in the park. The passenger is in custody." Evelyn could feel the barely contained energy as officers keyed up one after another, but despite the seeming chaos, every person, from the dispatcher to the officers in the field, played their part in the fluid choreography. She concentrated on the vehicle in front of her, tracking every turn and assessing the danger to innocent bystanders as they careened over the narrow roads. "Almost there," she muttered, "just a little farther." The suspect was clearly familiar with the large park as he took another quick turn toward the softball fields. But staying inside the park allowed more time for her colleagues to seal off the limited exits. At these speeds, their sergeant had to be close to calling off the pursuit. If they didn't contain this guy before then, they might have to let him escape. As they rounded the next corner, she flicked her eyes up ahead and smiled. A patrol car sat waiting for their approach. "What are you going to do now?" Almost as if reacting to her words, the driver wrenched the wheel to the left and tore through an open field. When she followed, her tires rebelled at the lack of asphalt, spinning and shredding the grass beneath them. Apparently having the same problem, the driver stopped abruptly and jumped out of the car. She slammed her car into park and shoved her own door open. She shouted for the suspect to stop and get on the ground. Knowing he wouldn't comply, she sprinted after him. He was fast, but even with the cumbersome gun belt jangling at her waist, she was faster. In seconds, she was within steps of catching him as he raced toward a vacant softball field. She groaned when he vaulted the chain-link fence, but she flung herself over it too. Chatter echoed from her shoulder mic as another officer called out their position. Backup was behind her somewhere, and if she could just catch this guy, her fellow officers would be with her in seconds. The suspect cut left toward the woods, but the sudden move slowed him down just enough. She pushed a little harder, her thighs burning in response. With 3 long strides, she was on him, tackling him. He grunted as she landed on top of him, but he didn't stay stationary for long. He flipped onto his back and threw her free. Before she had time to react, he landed a punch high on her cheek, and pain shot through the left side of her face. When he tried to scramble to his feet, she caught him. He swung at her again, but she avoided the blow and landed one of her own. She'd managed to pin him to the ground and pull one of his arms behind his back when several other officers surrounded her. One of them grabbed his arm, while another pressed a large hand against the back of his head, forcing his face into the grass. She secured the handcuffs with a satisfying series of clicks, then stepped back. 215B, suspect in custody, she said into her radio between panting breaths. She bent at the waist and braced her hands on her knees. 2 officers hauled the suspect to his feet. She straightened and clapped one of the officers on the shoulder. Thanks, Jeb. Nice catch, Jeb Briggs said, his eyes shining with the same adrenaline that sang through her body. You okay, Fisher? Sergeant Eddie Stallman asked as he reached her side. Yeah, I'm good, she said. How's your face? You need an x-ray? No, sir. She glanced at the suspect, knowing he was within earshot. He doesn't hit that hard. Okay, then you're feeling well enough to write reports. Smiled when she winced. Between the original traffic violations, the pursuit, and the charge for assaulting an officer, she'd be filling out reports for a couple of hours.
Wow. Way to, hit the ground running.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to open up with a little bit of action and keep things moving from the beginning.
That's nice. It's a good pace. What do you consider this book? What genre?
Pretty much just traditional romance. I mean, that's what I tend to stick with. Just, I guess it's just the stories that come to me so far.
No, I was curious because I didn't want to, misunderstand. Meaning that it was a jump to the start to get you interested and get you in the head and, with the character rather than it becoming a thriller where it be a continuous state of alarm and movement. That's why I was curious about the genre.
Yeah, I think it still kind of falls into traditional romance. I always try to think of the very first chapter as introducing the character, but trying to do it in an interesting way rather than just sort of mundane so that you don't get kind of lost in the beginning of it. She's a police officer, and I have 2 firefighter books as well, and so it sort of is in that world, but it's definitely very traditional, kind of her day-to-day work as opposed to some mystery or thriller, really.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm interested already. I'm definitely going to pick that up when it comes out. Why do you think that you find yourself attracted to, you have 2 novels that deal with firefighters, Point of Ignition and Fully Involved. What attracts you to, the first responders?
The uniform. No, actually, it's kind of a world I know. I've spent the last 14 years working in emergency dispatching for police, fire, and medical services.
Oh.
So it's, and my dad was a volunteer firefighter, my brother, and so I kind of, it's always been sort of there,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, talking about the 2 ones with the firefighters, they're very divergent in their types of stories. In Point of Ignition, Kate Chambers used to be a firefighter but was injured on the job and now has to work as an investigator. Whereas Fully Involved is a very, very emotional book from the beginning when Reed Webb loses his best friend Jimmy, and she's already familiar with loss, and then goes through the process. It's very intense. It has mourning in it, but there's also the tension between her and Isabel, who was her one of her first crushes when she was growing up.
Right, exactly. And Isabel just happens to be Jimmy's sister, which kind of makes the dynamic between the 2 of them a little more intense. But Fully Involved, it was my second book, and it's actually still the one that I get the most comments on. There's just something about the story, and it stays with me too. I mean, it's still one of probably my favorite book that I've written. So it was a very emotional story, but
It's not as, one of the things that I liked about it is that it strongly relies on things are not exactly what it seems. And Isabel felt kind of left out because she grew up, her brother was best friends with Reed, so she grew up and was a little younger and wasn't as, athletic as the other two, and always felt like she's being left behind. So there's that, and the fact that they both knew that they wanted to be firefighters, and a lot of the loss that Isabel had gone through, she decides to, thrust it at Reed. Reed doesn't need any help blaming herself. She blames herself in the utmost and barely can get around it. If it weren't for Jimmy's son, Chase, I don't think that she would have coped as well.
Right. She definitely has to be strong for Chase and for her mom, who lives with her and helps her take care of Chase. Isabel's loss started with the loss of her parents and Jimmy's wife, and the way that she dealt with that was by staying away. She was in college at the time, and she didn't return home to help Jimmy deal with that. And so then Jimmy's death kind of brings her back home because she doesn't want to tear Chase away from the only family he really has left. And she has a degree of guilt about not being there for him, during that first loss as well. So it kind of puts her in a different situation dealing with the major loss in her life. Yeah,
and Reed seems to swallow down her pain. It's almost as if she breathes it. Not just from the loss of Jimmy and the tension with Isabel and her concerns about Isabel taking Chase away to live where she lives currently, but she's also had to swallow down her love and attraction for Isabel, which she felt since she was an adolescent.
Right. Yes. That's really a beautiful way of putting it, that she just kind of, she absorbs it all inside, and it has become a habit because, like you said, she's been doing it since she was really young.
And one of the reasons why I like the dynamic between Reed and Isabel. Isabel believes that she's straight, identifies as straight, and then later, throughout the book, she starts to have interest in Reed. And it's a sticky topic when writing lesbian romance to have, one of the leads be straight. And, never fall in love with a straight girl, and even like the tension between the two of them, that not only would Reed not pursue her because she was straight, but the real reason why she didn't pursue her is because she's Jimmy's sister, and she just couldn't see herself doing that, and she just can't help but fall back in love with her, but believes that it's hopeless and that nothing's ever going to come from it. Yeah, and I think one of the reasons, I guess, we're all straight until we're not, to some degree. I know people who've known since, I have a close friend who's known he was gay since he was 6 years old. Mm-hmm. And he never struggled with it, never. But then, I was in college before I, realized it. And so we kind of all run the gambit anyway. And so to me, that was just her story. That's who she was. And later on, when we learn how her and Jimmy's father felt about homosexuality, we kind of can see where, had she had any kind of leanings in that direction, she would have stuffed them down as well, because she knew how he felt about it. And, for a lot of us, parental approval is a really big deal, and can keep you from fully exploring something. So I'm not sure if I remember correctly, but didn't how Isabel's father felt about homosexuality come up around the time when Reed came out or was discovered to liking girls?
Yes. Yep, exactly.
So poor Reed. She really, buckles down, takes responsibility and things to heart, and just, but she's resigned to, not martyrdom, because that's not who she is. She's very stoic, but she resigns herself to not having what she wants. That's not going to happen for her. And then when Jimmy dies, she almost feels like she doesn't deserve the happiness because he can't have that. He can't raise his son,
Right. Well, and I think, she definitely resigns herself to, I'm not going to be able to have the one person that I think I've always wanted, but I have my family, and I have Jimmy, and I have Chase, and I have firefighting, which she really, really loves, and she gets a certain sense of personal fulfillment from her work, and kind of convinces herself that that's going to be enough, and doesn't really put herself out there emotionally because she feels like she has all this other responsibility, and that's enough for her. Until obviously Isabel comes back in the picture. So,
and even still, it's, I couldn't imagine what it'd be like to be Reed and have somebody as important to her as Jimmy. They've been friends and a part of each other's lives as far back as they can remember, and to lose that and also feel intensely responsible for it, because she should have left the building when they told them to, but she wanted to save, I believe, a young girl, and that choice ended up losing her best friend.
Right, and she definitely takes all that on herself. And believe me, I have gotten a good bit of flack for killing Jimmy in the very first scene of the book. But, you don't know him at that point, so I felt like that was part of the story. And I honestly feel like as a reader, I mean, I've gone back and read the book myself, and I honestly feel like as a reader that you almost don't feel that loss as strongly until later in the book, when you do actually get to know Jimmy and what a great guy he was and what he had to deal with, losing his wife and his parents and then raising an infant, So it was interesting that I didn't feel the loss of him as deeply until later in the book.
Well, I think that is definitely true, and I also know that a lot of people choose lesbian fiction, especially romance, to leave the vagaries of life and, be in an imaginative space. And many of those readers are not going to be on board for somebody dying. Definitely not one of the main characters, because you can have that tension, but that's not how the story is allowed to end. There has to be like a nice little happy ending, and even it's almost like there's a lower threshold for what they're willing to deal with in terms of adversity while reading the story.
Well, I do think I got away with it a little bit with Jimmy, but definitely when you're talking about the two main protagonists, I mean, when you promise somebody romance, it's really hard to kill one of them off and leave people feeling like that you've really done them justice, because people do kind of expect a certain thing with a romance. You expect that there's going to be some either some kind of happily ever after, or at least the promise of it. You want to be left feeling like if they're not together right this minute, there's still the potential there, and that they're going to be happy. And I think when you market a book as a romance, you kind of make that promise, and there can be exceptions, but for the most part, I think you have to deliver on that. And I still feel like I did with this book.
Yeah, absolutely. There's another series by another author, which I don't want to mention the author of the series, but I got to the point, because there were so many, and the characters continued through each of the books. I got to the point where there's one character, she went through so much in book 2, I couldn't cope with the rumblings of something awful happening to her in this particular book, and I ended up stopping reading it.
Wow.
Because I was like, no, you can't do that to her. She's already been in the hospital. She's been through so much. You can't have her targeted that way. And I'm not usually a wussy when it comes to stuff, and I tend to I like the more serious stuff and the darker things as well. But for some reason, I was like, no, you can't do that to this character. And I literally put it down and haven't read the subsequent books. And I'm sure maybe at some point I'll revisit it. But I realize that there are certain things that I'm looking for as a reader. And you can have angst. And of course, when you're dealing with cops or firefighters, there's always, like, part of it built in is the danger of injury and death. But, there has to be a balance. And if you're going for something that's supposed to be an escape and you want to experience falling in love through the characters, there's only so much that you can tolerate. At the same time, I realized that in real life, like similar thing dealing with Fade to Black or, whether or not the characters make love within the book, In real life, you're probably not going to wait several months and have all this angst and adversity that, comes to a pinnacle in the end and then finally they get together. Most people don't wait that long. But when I'm reading a book, I get a little disappointed if things are resolved too early or a new source of tension is not created to keep you going through the book. I've actually put down a book before when I'm like, well, they've already realized that they love each other and they've had sex and they want to live a life with each other. What's the point of me keeping on reading?
Right. You definitely do have to keep challenging the characters, and there has to be enough tension, believable reasons for them to stay apart, and not just some kind of misunderstanding, but some believable reasons for them to stay apart through the duration of the book, or else the end of your book is in the middle. Mm-hmm. And you're right. Typically, it's not that way in life. We don't have all the drama and the tension, and we don't fight as hard to stay away from somebody in real life. Mm-hmm. I mean, our love stories happen a lot faster, but I guess that's kind of the that's kind of the draw of fiction, is that we get to read about and root for them. Exactly. And want them to end up together. Exactly,
and you have to, in order to create really rich characters and two romantic leads together, there has to be chemistry and adversity. There has to be a tug and pull. And it's not satisfying otherwise. These are things that you're looking at, as a reader. It's kind of like a 3-act play. First, you get to know the main character, and then something happens, like a point of no return, and then you're into the body of the work, and then there's the pinnacle where you're like, oh no, this person can't die, or they can't take another job that's across country, or whatever it's going to be, because they'll never be able to be couples, and then there's a resolution. And I think that's just the rhythm of fiction. And I feel like there's this one book that I read recently where very shortly after they met each other, they tumbled in bed together and realized that they were the one, to the point where it's really implausible because the time frame is so collapsed into, maybe a couple, maybe 10 days or something. Not like that doesn't happen in reality, but it's not what I'm looking for when I'm reading a romance. So I was like, how on earth are they going to, the next 200 or 300 pages going to happen if they're already together? Right.
My book, Designed for Love, I think, let me back up by saying some friends of mine are always waiting. They're reading and they're like, why did it take so long for them to have sex? It's all the way at the end of the book. I have to read all this stuff leading up to it before I even get to the good parts. So when I was writing Designed for Love, and it was like chapter 2, they have sex in chapter 2.
And it's really hot.
So that was my book for them. It was like, here's the sex in chapter 2, but after that, they don't get to have sex again for a really long time, because it almost seems like if they have sex that early, then there still has to be this back building of tension that keeps them apart, or if they continue to have sex through the whole book, there still has to be a reason why it's just sex at that point.
Well,
it's not. They're not meant to be, or they don't realize they are until later in the story.
Jillian and Will are very attracted to each other from the jump, and then ends up literally, I guess on a counter in the kitchen having sex. And It happens really fast. But when you dive in, without thinking into something, and they both come from different perspectives. Jillian is who she is. And Will has a lot of baggage going on, and there's a lot of misunderstanding between the two of them. So the possibility of continued growth of a romantic relationship is arrested pretty fast, and Will locks down and guards up really early, and it takes a while for them to figure each other out, to find out that Jillian's not this superficial, snotty bitch. She didn't realize what she was doing to Will, and she's also a very private person, but Will took it the wrong way, that she was ashamed to be with a worker on her house. Yeah. Right.
Well, and I think, to a certain degree, they do come from very different places, and Will has lived in a small town for her entire life. the same small town that Jillian is intent on not staying in. So they both kind of feel like there's no future there, even after their first encounter. And there may be a little bit of superficialness to Jillian, but because she has to realize that she's misjudged Will and that there's more to her than she originally thought.
I liked the fact that the construction company had to take on another project that was going to pull away almost all the people that were on Jillian's project. And instead of, just letting it go, she, Will takes pride in her work. And Jillian's like, we got to make this happen. I'll work with you. And at first she wasn't for it. And then she let it happen. And it kind of shows a different side of Jillian and also gives them time to percolate and become interested in each other again. Right,
exactly. And it does kind of show a different side of Jillian. Well, I mean, it's the same. She is who she is, and she kind of throws herself into whatever she's doing. Manual labor doesn't usually fall into the equation for her, but she's not afraid of it either. Mm-hmm. And she ends up... Actually, the scene where they're tiling the bathroom is still one of my favorite scenes in that book.
Can you explain it to the listeners?
It just... it kind of shows Will as being the more knowledgeable one in that scene, and prior to that, Jillian kind of has this, she's got everything figured out, and, she's in real estate, so she knows how this flipping houses things work, and she feels like she knows what she's doing, but this scene kind of puts her in a student perspective to Will being the teacher, mm-hmm. and she kind of sits back and lets Will lead her. Mm-hmm. And I just kind of like that dynamic with them.
I do. And one of the things that's been popping up in some conversations that I've had lately is doing a series on gender and sexuality, and we talk about how there's usually butch femme pairings for whatever reasons, but even though they're there, there's not a tried and true behavioral or skill set that belongs to the butch in the book or just belongs to the femme in the book. Like the femme is not, constantly concerned about breaking a nail or is too precious to get involved with something physical. And the butch doesn't necessarily have to be quiet, silent, and more emotionally stunted and, more into the physicality of things. There's a lot more to play with. And that's one of the reasons why lesbian fiction has come so far from these more stereotypical roles. You'll find, almost imitating men and women together to having a lot more choices.
Right, and I think lesbian fiction is kind of mirroring society in that as well. I mean, you do still see those butch femme couples, but it's not all there is. There's definitely a wide range of people, and I feel like, getting back to Fully Involved, Reed is definitely butch, and Isabel is definitely more feminine, and I do follow that dynamic there. But then when you start talking about Point of Ignition, Kate is actually very feminine. When she was in the fire academy, she inadvertently earned the nickname Firefighter Barbie. So she actually has to kind of face those stereotypes that people have for feminine women in these types of professions and kind of prove people wrong through most of her career.
Yeah, I remember it reminds me of when I was in college and I just started playing rugby. And you never, like growing up, girls are not really introduced to their physical strengths and their abilities to do things that are physical. I think I'm 36, so I know things have changed. But that finally feeling that you're capable of doing those things. So she may be lithe and feminine and look like life-size version of Barbie, but she really enjoys the physicality of her job, and she's proven herself to be, one of them. And then an accident happens and she gets injured. And I remember on the rugby field, you don't want to seem like a wuss. You definitely don't want to cry. And I was playing and this girl elbowed me like straight in the nose. And yeah. And it didn't break or anything, but if you've ever been bonked real good in the nose, you know that tears are imminent. There's nothing you can do about it. But I was thinking to myself, like, I can't be crying on the pitch. And I could imagine her, you know, firefighter Barbie, thinking, of course I get injured and have, I can't be on the job anymore, you know.
Right. And it is interesting. Things have changed. I'm just thinking back to, we didn't have rugby. I was from a very small town, but, you know, the girls' basketball team was not ever quite as treated as equally as the boys. And you kind of, that's just the way things were. And I think it's changing now, and I think we can look to professional sports and see that, you know, the strength of the women's United States soccer team and some of the Olympic athletes that we have, and it's just amazing how the roles of women athletes are changing.
Yeah, I think that, I believe it's Title IX or something like that, where there has to be more equity between male and female sports, including allocation of funds and places for them to practice and all the other things that go behind the support. And one of the things that, you know, growing up with that, the promise was change. And then the Olympics this year, the women, you know, pretty much swept it in so many different categories, getting more gold medals than the men. And this was the promise realized. And I like to see that out there and have, you know, young girls growing up watching these female athletes of soccer and gymnastics and swimming. And it's just good to see, you know, these strong women who made it happen, as opposed to being the kind of like, well, you really should be a cheerleader, or we'll let you have sports, but, you know, kind of off to the side.
Right, exactly.
So, in kind of switching gears, another book that I've really liked of yours is called A Place to Rest.
Yeah. Actually, A Place to Rest is another one that I really enjoyed writing. I tend to bring the family dynamics as themes to a lot of my books, and this was definitely a big family book to me. And I'm actually tossing around the idea of bringing Sawyer and Jory back as secondary characters in a new story. So.
How do you feel about drawing on characters for different books? I just recently interviewed Radcliffe, and she was talking about how from mainstream fiction she had seen an author creating a community as character, not just as, you know, backdrop, and drawing characters within the same context. In the case of her series, in Pennsylvania and Philly. So it makes the space more real if you're in this particular hospital and this trauma surgeon is interacting with this anesthesiologist, or this flight nurse is being treated by, you know, both the midwife and the trauma OB-GYN doctor. And I find that it lends a level of realism, but it's also difficult because you have to figure out a meaningful way to introduce the characters from another novel into a current piece.
Right. I have read a few of her series, and there's some other authors out there who have done the same thing. J. Lee Meyer has brought back several of her characters in a sort of a small series. And I think it's interesting. It's not something I've done yet, but I'm kind of playing with it simply because the character that I want to write in the next book is another pastry chef. She's actually a cake decorator. Mm-hmm. And so the idea is to maybe have her working with Jory at some point. I think it's interesting, and when it's done well, I really enjoy it. There's several of Rad's series that I really like following the stories. She brings in new characters, a new central couple, and so you get that excitement of a new relationship, and you get to follow them. But you get to also see what, some of her previous characters are doing. And I think the key is to make sure that the secondary characters have a story. Mm-hmm. they may not be front and center in the book, but they do have an important story and a continuation of their relationship that's more than just their everyday life, but they have new challenges and new ways that they grow together. So
yeah, exactly. I like that. And one of on a side note, I want some of Jory's desserts right away because they sound wonderful.
I spent a lot of time watching the Food Network while I was researching that book. And I mean, I like to cook. I like to, I don't do a lot of desserts. I'm trying to stay away from desserts right now, but I enjoy cooking. And so it was fun for me to do the research for this book and to kind of immerse myself in that sort of restaurant atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And Sawyer's an interesting character. And when you first get introduced to her, she's a bit of a fuck up. She like flies from one job to another, and all she knows is that she doesn't want to work for the family business and is fairly flaky. And she also falls into beds fairly often, so I don't really blame Jory for not wanting to entertain the attraction that she has for her, because she's not steady. She's not solid, and that's definitely not where Jory wants to be.
Right, yeah. Jory hasn't had a lot of reliable people in her life, and so that's definitely what she's looking for. And Sawyer is not. I mean, Sawyer's like the complete opposite of me. I could not be that kind of person. That she has no she leaves a job without knowing what her next step is going to be, and she just doesn't have any fear, or maybe fear is not the right word, but apprehension about what's going to happen tomorrow. If I do this today, what's going to happen tomorrow? I'll figure out tomorrow when it gets here. And it's interesting. It was very interesting to write that kind of character.
Yeah, that kind of fecklessness is very young for me, because when I was younger, I felt I was fearless and indestructible and confident to the point of being cocky at times. And I'm like, everything's going to be fine. I am a smart, accomplished woman. I'll make it happen. All right, we'll do this, we'll do that. And I didn't have a lot of the fear, and I fell flat on my face a lot of different times because I was not practical. I did not think ahead. Well, my biggest moronic thing that I ever did was decided I was going to do the cinematic thing, which is buy a car and drive cross country and, find myself in another locale. I tried New Orleans, that didn't work for me. And then I went to California, Northern California, where one of my third cousins lives in Sebastopol, which is wine country. And I didn't do it in advance. I didn't save up money. I barely had enough to eat or find a place to sleep. I was using my mobile card to buy food to eat as I was driving across the country. It was just so stupid. But when, I was 23 and I thought I was invincible and it's all going to work out. It works out in the movies. Why wouldn't it work out in real life, And
that just makes my stomach hurt just thinking about it.
Exactly.
I can't be that person. I can't. But and I think you're right. I think at a certain age, that's okay, and it's almost acceptable to be, figuring yourself out. But then you get to an age where people just expect you to have, okay, you're done with that now, and let's, you
need to have your shit together.
And she doesn't do that. She hasn't done that yet, and I think that's where her sister Erica's frustration comes in, and that's where Jory's reluctance to get involved with her comes in.
Mm-hmm. But also, I think Erica has an impression of Sawyer that wouldn't let Sawyer grow. It seems like Sawyer has to be the screw-up. Sawyer can't be trusted and can't be seen to do things properly when it's thrust upon her to take care of the business. And it's almost as if, you couldn't possibly be getting this right. I know you as a screw-up. I can't trust you with the business. And any kind of little mistake that gets made, it's like a reinforcement of Sawyer never going to be able to be a responsible person managing the business, like screwing up the prices on the menus.
Right. And that's kind of been her role in the family for so long that it's become an expectation. And even though she'll say she wants Sawyer to grow up and she wants her to be responsible and she wants this and this and this. Despite those words, Erica's really not ready for her to do any of those things. She just wants her. She really just expects her to stay in the role that she's been in for so long, and she and her brother will run the business and keep things afloat while Sawyer continues to screw everything up. So.
And being attracted and interested in Jory just pisses them off because they're like, we have this wonderful pastry chef that's going to make good things happen for our business, for our restaurant, and you're going to screw it up by sleeping with her, breaking her heart, and then she's going to leave.
Right, and that's the expectation because that's how it's been. Sawyer got involved with one of Erica's very close friends, and they're no longer friends anymore. So that's kind of her, this is how it's going to go because this is how it's gone in the past. You're going to mess this up. There's no possible way that you can be who Jory needs you to be, and we need her more than you do, basically.
We need her more than we need you also is like the unspoken.
Right.
You know, because we can count on her and she's special and whatnot. And I kind of like that Sawyer was able to grow as a character, even though, most of the time, first she doesn't want to be there and she's, feels like she's above this kind of work, even though she does a lot of bizarre things to make money. But then she seems to find her zone. And when her sister comes back and sees that she's being successful, she also kind of has this concern that not necessarily that she's being replaced, but then she doesn't exactly know her place in the business now that Sawyer's actually acting responsibly and making good decisions.
Right, and I think there is a degree of martyrdom on Erica's part because she was initially a chef, and her parents were running the business, and her parents, her father had a little health scare, and her parents end up retiring to Florida, and so Erica is thrust into running the business, even though what she really wants is to be in the kitchen. But then she does that for so long and takes on that role, and it's sort of like, I'm doing this against my will, but I'm doing it for the family. And so she becomes a little bit of a martyr in that sense, and she's not really ready to give that up.
I definitely, especially with the family dynamic, you get used to particular people in a role and you don't see them as possible as making change in their life. And sometimes change in and of itself can be scary. Like that change is scary thing kind of plays into Sequestered Hearts, where the main character, Corey Saxton, was a premier painter, I believe. Yes. And then is unable to paint because of a physical ailment. And her entire way of defining herself was as this premier, amazing artist. And so she can't bear to not be seen that way, so she kind of holes up and sequesters herself.
Right.
And then Bennett McLean, I love that they assumed that it was going to be a guy, and it ended up being a woman with a man's name coming to do the interview. And one of the things that I see fairly often in novels is when a reporter is put on a particular subject that they feel that is not, good enough for their talents. And, they're not going to write a puff piece. They want to get to the meat of an issue. They want to, address it, make it special, and utilize their skills. Whereas, from the standpoint of somebody like Corey, she does not want to be examined. She does not want people to know what's going on because she sees herself as diminished. And when things don't work very well for them, she kind of tries to default to that playboy role who's, she's not very caring about how people are. She lives a fast life, doing fast things, even though she doesn't have the heart to live that way anymore.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back because that was my first book, 2007, I think. So it's been a long time. But yeah, it definitely, Bennett's whole thing is, I've come all the way up here. They sent her up to upstate New York where Corey has kind of hidden herself away at her home up there. And, I've come all the way up here to this dinky little airport. I had to ride in a pickup truck over a bumpy road to get to your house. There's not a hotel in sight. I've got to stay at your house where I'm not comfortable. And now you want me to write fluff so that you can get back in the good graces of, the public, when what she really wants is just to get the real story, and she's determined to do that. So,
and that there's that common vein where when a person is dealing with a journalist, with a reporter, the subject is always trying to guard themselves from letting these people see, beneath their guard, beneath their shell, to their reality. So it makes for attention as romantic leads, because Corey is attracted to Bennett, but that kind of makes her guard go down a little bit, and she doesn't want, because she's not paying attention, to have herself exposed and have it splashed in front of the media, which is the last thing that she wants to do, so she guards herself a little bit harder. And then Bennett, on her end, is having, problems being being objective with somebody that she's developing interest with.
Right. I think there's always a level of mistrust when you're dealing with media, with reporters. And I kind of, I see that a little bit in my work as well. There's always a feeling of anything you say can end up on the evening news. And so there's definitely, when you start looking at police and fire departments, they have people who are trained for media relations, and they're the people who speak to the media, not just anybody. And so I think that kind of mistrust sort of flavors the relationship between Bennett and Corey on both sides eventually.
Yeah, I tend, from a personal standpoint, at one point I didn't have enough money to buy more books, so I tend to reread them over and over again. And I guess one of the things that I tend to go towards is either what I believe is a redemption story, where somebody thinks that they have hit rock bottom and that there's no recovery from it, and then they find that there is hope, for them to be able to move on and find the possibilities back in life. And even though Corey doesn't have a hell of a lot of faith in it, Bennett, for some reason, kind of is a catalyst for her to try. Like she actually walked down to the stairs and was in the general room of the studio, even though she had been avoiding being in there in the first place. And then, the other thing about being an artist is that Corey puts herself on the canvas, and if she's not feeling confident in herself, she's afraid to reveal that part of herself, which makes her feel more vulnerable. And in order to feel safe, she has to figure out how to open up with the knowledge that the person that they're loving is going to help them, and that they're not going to fall flat on their face.
Yeah, I think it's, I kind of equate Corey as an artist, being a painter, to sometimes, as a writer. It's really, I can put words on paper, but I have to be open to the depth of the story in order to convey it properly. And there's times when there's stuff going on for me personally, and I just don't feel like writing. Sometimes I force myself to, sometimes I don't. It depends on where I'm at in the book and in deadlines and whatnot. But I think you really have to be willing to open yourself up and put a little bit of yourself in there, or it ends up not feeling authentic. And I feel like I've never painted, but I feel like it would be similar. If somebody looks at your work and they don't feel anything, then it just comes out flat.
Exactly. We talked a bit about how important tension is, and timing and pacing for keeping the reader with you. At the same time, if you're going to show people a romance, if you're going to show people falling in love, the emotion has to be there. And in order for it to be there, the author has to bring it to the page. And whether it's an escape from their life or has parallels to things that they have experienced or otherwise, you still have to be willing to put yourself out there on the page, because it will fall flat. Then the emotions are not going to be there, and the characters are not going to be relatable, and the arc and the plot is going to fizzle if you don't invest yourself. But at the same time, there's this feeling that this is my baby, I wrote this, and then I'm going to put it in front of other people, and I have to be strong enough to not only receive accolades, but also feel the criticism and potential flame, because that's the nature of anything that's entertainment or art, is that there are going to people who are into your stuff, and there's going to be people who are not. And I think that that's the big deal, is getting a thick enough skin to continue to create and not be stymied by like bad reviews or, you know, things that didn't, you know, go off as you planned them to. And you have to continue to keep yourself open, you know, as the books go by.
Right, and I think that gets easier. Honestly, you know, my first book, it was very difficult to put it out there and to think, you know, everybody who's going to be reading this. And actually, you know, thinking about friends and family of mine reading it was even more daunting, because it's like, these are people I have to face every day, you know, so it definitely was very nerve-wracking, but I think it gets easier. You get a little more confidence in what you're doing, and I have a great editor, and I can look at all of my books as an arc and really see my craft evolving to the extent that my first drafts are better, and I'm learning new techniques, and so you get a little more confidence, but you also get, like you said, that thick skin that not everybody's going to love what I do, and not every book is going to come out exactly how I envisioned it from the very beginning, but as long as I try to keep writing from a perspective of the truth of the story and not trying to write for you know, any type of audience in particular, not trying to change what I do based on what someone might think of it. Hopefully it still comes across as authentic.
Yeah, I think that that's a good balance to strike, and that may not be easy. One of the things that attracts me to Bold Strokes authors is I feel the environment at that particular publishing house is a lot about nurturing writers and helping them grow. And when I like an author, if it's retroactively, I go back and read all their stuff and I can see how they grow. And then there are some authors that I catch in the beginning. And one of my biggest pleasurable things to watch was Winter Pennington. When she had, her first 2 books come out, and I read them and I liked them well enough. But it wasn't until she put together the Rousseau Lusoria series that I saw her blossom intensely. And I'm more interested in the short stories that come out and the subsequent novels because I've seen her grow. And I think one of the things that is so good about Bold Strokes is that they do foster that level of development and growth. They see promise, they see talent, and they nurture it.
Yeah, absolutely. From the very beginning in working with them, I've always felt supported. And like I said, I have a great editor. We have a really good relationship, and I feel like I get honest feedback, and I get lessons that I can carry over into the next book. And when I catch myself working on the first draft of the next book and really almost instinctively, without very much thought, doing some of the things that we talked about in the previous book, it's satisfying. And then it leaves us open to concentrate on, really making the story the best that it can be without having to look at the little mechanics that we really did have to look at in the first book. Mm-hmm. And so
it's about refining and honing and becoming better at the craft, I believe.
Right, exactly. I mean, there's only so much time between when I finish the first draft and when the book is scheduled to be published, and so we definitely don't want to spend that entire time going over, really elementary techniques and errors. So hopefully I can minimize all that and leave us to be able to just make the story even better.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. So I wanted to thank you for coming on the show.
And well, thank you.
You're welcome, and for reading from your new novel. And I wish you nothing but the best. And hopefully next time you have something on deck, let me know, and you can come on the show again.
Absolutely. And please let me know what you think once you've read the new one.
Absolutely. Thank you.